Hi, and welcome to the lecture for Chapter 7, where we will be discussing reward and punishment. I've split this lecture into multiple sections, and this is part 1. If we can be held morally responsible, then apportioning rewards and punishments seems appropriate. Who rewards or punishes, and what kinds and types of reward and punishment that might be thought appropriate are the main concern of this chapter. Therefore, the concept of justice is crucial, and the main forms of justice are introduced and explained within this chapter. So that's what we'll be talking about throughout the rest of this lecture. There are different kinds or theories of reward and punishment. And there's a difference between retributive justice and distributive justice. Retributive justice, with an R, is the one, it's one of the oldest forms of justice. It proposes that people should get what they deserve in the form of either reward or punishment, regardless of the consequences. So retributive justice, or the theory that it's based on, called retributivism, is a non-consequentialist theory. So if we are being good retributivists, we disregard the consequences and we just simply look at what the person deserves, either reward or punishment. Distributive justice, with a D, is concerned with the equitable distribution of benefits and burdens among members of society. So the focus is between those two systems or justifications for reward or punishment are a little bit different. Reward, so the definition, the term reward that we're going to be talking about in this chapter is something given or received in response to meritorious behavior. So if you do something good, then you're going to be given something or receive something in exchange or in response to that more meritorious behavior. Punishment, on the other hand, is the act of penalizing someone for wrongdoing. So if you do something bad, you're going to receive a punishment. Retribution is also a desert theory, and it's commonly referred to as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This form of justice says that a person who is concerned with wrongful acts should also experience it as a form of retaliation, essentially. And we'll talk about all of these in more depth moving through the lecture today. Utilitarianism is, of course, a results theory, right? A consequentialist theory. And utilitarianism advocates rewarding and punishing based on the results of an act, or whether or not the punishment or the reward itself would bring about the best consequences for the greatest number of people. So retributivism and utilitarianist kind of theories are going to be on opposite ends of a spectrum. Restitution, or the compensation theory, is the act of somehow compensating the victim for the harm or wrong done to the victim. And so the idea there is that the wrongdoer should or is responsible for restoring the victim to the state they were in before the wrong occurred. Sometimes that's in the form of an apology if it's a minor offense. Sometimes it's a damages award, a monetary award, and so that range. The range of what counts as restitution can really be all over the place, and does sometimes vary from offense to offense and from culture to culture. So focusing now more on reward rather than punishment. Rewards can be distributed in 4 different ways. They can be distributed equally without regard for ability or merit at all. They can be distributed according to ability. So if I show more ability in whatever the task is than you do, then I am necessarily more deserving of a reward than you are. Reward can be distributed according to merit or deserts, or it can be distributed according to need. So those are the 4 ways that rewards can be distributed, at least the 4 ways that the author of the book talks about. Now, criteria for rewarding people. There's the egalitarian criterion, or the equal distribution of goods and rewards. Equal distribution without any regard to ability or merit is the foundation of this egalitarian criterion. An example would be of a Swedish hospital and a kidney dialysis. So the issue here is, how do we decide who gets the dialysis when there's a greater need than the ability to provide dialysis? So based on what criteria do we decide which patients get the treatment and which have to go without? What criteria are applicable? Should we use a lottery? Is that the most fair and ethical means of deciding? Or should we, one option is to see who can pay the most amount for the treatment based on age or gender or likelihood to succeed in the world, if they continue to live after they receive this treatment. Of course, there's a problem with this equality of distribution. The egalitarian method ignores merit, ability, and need, and really goes with this kind of lottery system. So should those with differing aptitudes, skills, or abilities be treated the same? Equality of consideration, if they do have other attributes, race, sex, religion, age, handicap, to what extent are those different attributes important factors? And are all people really equal? And so with the egalitarian distribution, one assumption, if we take the egalitarian model, is that all people are equal and therefore should be treated equally. But then we look around and we think that there are cases in which people are not equal based on skill level, ability level, age, handicap. There are a number of ways in which we are not the same, either for better or for worse. And so treating us all as if we are the same may help some people and it may hinder other people. Another way to distribute reward is looking at production or what people produce. The quality and or kind of quality of production is the criteria for reward under this model. Those who produce better or more should be rewarded accordingly. Highly performing student in a class should receive an A. A poorly performing student or someone who produces lower quality work should receive a lower grade. That's the idea behind the production model. Another model for distribution of reward is based on effort. So the idea here is that we reward effort regardless of quality of the work or quantity of the work. So if you put in a lot of effort into your science project and it's a terrible science project, but you really, really try, then you should be deserving of reward. A couple problems with this theory, of course, is, one major problem really is that it's really hard to measure reward. How do we measure it's really difficult to measure effort. How can we tell how much effort you put in as opposed to how much effort I put in? We both might say that we've tried really hard on our science projects, and they both might be terrible projects. So it's difficult to kind of measure reward. Whereas with the previous model I talked about, production model, that's really easy to measure, right? Because we look at kind of the number of essays you've written, or the number of times that your science project was able to prove whatever it is you set out for it to prove. And so production we can measure easily, whereas effort is really difficult to measure. Another model of distribution for reward is according to ability. Of course, by ability here, we mean natural ability, not enhanced ability. And there are a number of ways we can enhance our ability through, performance-enhancing drugs and other kind of tricks of the trade that way. But one main question here is, should people be rewarded for simply having an ability for which they have no responsibility? So if we take somebody who's kind of naturally skilled at golf, and they don't even really have to try. They just kind of pick up a golf club and know what to do with it, and they have great golf games. But they don't really they don't put in much effort. It's just kind of a natural ability they have. Should they be rewarded more than the person who really struggles to play golf and has to put in so much practice time in order to get their game to a higher level? And so you can see the tension there between rewarding someone for something that maybe they're not even really responsible for, as opposed to rewarding somebody for something that they have to work really hard at. And so another issue with the ability distribution model is, how should acquired ability be rewarded? If you have to work for it, should you be rewarded more than if you don't? Or if, the next question is, should those with ability be rewarded even if they choose not to utilize those abilities? And that, I think, is a really interesting question. So if you have a natural ability for, I don't know, something great, brain surgery, but you decide that you would really, that you would rather be a lifeguard at the pool, and so you don't use your natural ability to save lives and perform these brain surgeries, do you deserve a reward? Well, it's hard to say, but on the ability theory, you have this ability, and so therefore you should be deserving of reward. But you're also not making use of that ability, right? You're not producing anything. You're not putting in any effort. And so there again is some tension between how we distribute rewards. So that model of distribution definitely comes with some problems. The next model of distribution for reward is based on need, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Rewards should be given to those who most need them. And within that need model, there are two different kind of branches there. There's private need and public need. And by private need, we're going to look at what individuals need as a result of their own poverty. And so what should be given? Should we, the government or community or an individual organization, whoever the we is we want to talk about in any given circumstance, should we be providing people money or jobs or scholarships or job training because they need it? Or should we look at ability or effort or production or some other way to distribute money or jobs or scholarships? And so if we focus on just that latter example, scholarships, one question is, should the brightest or the neediest receive the scholarship? And so how should we distribute the scholarship money, right? Because we have a finite amount of scholarship. Right, a set amount in the pie to distribute. And so who should get it? The people who need it the most? We can certainly see an argument for that, but then it also seems like the people who maybe put in a lot of effort to achieve a certain score on their SATs, for example, or someone who is able to, kind of make the best use of it through production. Another question with regard to this model of distribution is, does reward in terms of need eliminate incentive? So if we know as potential college students that if we show enough need that we'll receive scholarships, is that going to take away or eliminate the incentive for us to try hard on our SAT scores? And so there's kind of a risk with distribution according to private need. Another question with regard to this model of distribution is rewarding those in need fair to those who are either talented or hardworking? Because again, our ideal is to find the most fair model of distribution, or at least some people are going to say that that's the model we should be working with, right? This egalitarian distribution. And so distributing it based on need rather than hard work or talent might not seem fair. And so that's another issue with the private need model of distribution. One more model within that need model is reward based on fulfilling some public need. And so should a basketball player, for example, receive greater rewards than a nurse or a public school teacher? Because we do reward, right? I mean, we pay professional athletes in many cases more than we pay nurses or teachers. And so if we're talking about salary as the reward in this scenario, professional basketball players or football players are receiving greater reward than emergency room nurses or public school elementary school teachers. And so the question here under the public need model of distribution is, should we be giving more or greater reward to areas where we need to fill a public need, like in education or medical care? And so that's kind of the last model of distribution that we'll talk about. And I know this has been kind of quick and I've thrown a lot of information at you, but the book does a great job of kind of breaking all this down also. Let's look at a couple other criteria for distribution that we see kind of in the real world. One is seniority. So sometimes the longer you've stayed at a job or in some profession, we seem to think that you are more deserving of a greater reward or greater salary. Unpleasantness of a job. So if something is kind of really gruesome or unappealing, there is certainly an argument to be made that we should incentivize people to do that job by rewarding them more. Next, we have physical danger. And here you can think of first responders, police officers, firefighters, and there's certainly an argument to reward them more than maybe some other professions. Next, we have a job or profession requiring expensive equipment. There's an argument that perhaps those jobs should be given greater reward because of the expense of the equipment. And lastly, the length and expense of training required to do a certain profession. And that's one of the reasons why we think perhaps medical doctors should be paid higher salaries than some other professions out there, because medical school, it requires a lot of training and it's fairly expensive training. And so the idea is that these people have kind of taken on this debt and then they should receive a reward or higher salaries when they take on that profession. Okay. So we've talked about a couple different distribution models with respect to reward, and now I want to talk about theories of how to reward. And as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, there are two main theories that deal with how to reward and punish. Right now, we've only talked about reward. Later on in the next lecture, we'll talk more about punishment. But all of these theories about reward also apply to punishment. And the two main theories are retributive, or kind of desert-based, the non-consequentialist theory, or utilitarian, which is the result-based or consequence-based theory. The retributivist or just desserts theory itself. The idea here is that people deserve rewards or punishments for what they've done, not for the consequences of what they've done. And so frequently we look at what they've done, what someone has done, primarily in terms of effort. And so the idea here is that people in the same profession are rewarded equally. Some consequences of this theory are that more productive workers may leave the company, because again, it's not about the consequences, it's about kind of your position or your profession or your title. And workers may not take the risk because there's no incentive to kind of do more or be more creative. And this in turn will affect business and then eventually the entire economy. But keep in mind this retributive theory, especially when we're talking about punishment and kind of disparity in punishment later on. Now, the utilitarian theory or results theory. Think back to chapter 2, which showed us that utilitarianism is based on good consequences for everyone affected by acts or rules. Reward is given only on the basis of bringing about the best consequences. So the question here is, does this tend to reward results instead of hard work or desert? And is it good to reward an undeserving person simply because they've brought about the best consequences? So one way to think about this is doing something and essentially getting lucky in how it all shakes out. So if you were, I don't know, negligently kind of skateboarding along a path and kind of knock this old lady, and she was about to fall off this path you were walking along and kind of over the cliffside. And you realize that, kind of in the accident, your iPhone, was tossed up in the air. And so you went to reach for your iPhone to save your iPhone. You're kind of a jerk in this scenario, sorry. Right? So you're skateboarding along, you hit this old lady, she starts to tumble off the cliff, as does your phone. And you reach out for your phone to save the phone from falling over the cliff. But accidentally, you grab the old lady and you save her from falling off the cliff. According to the utilitarian model, that was a great result that you brought about. Now, you brought it about accidentally. You were actually trying to save your phone. But with utilitarian or results theory, we're just focused on the consequences. And the consequences were you saved an old lady. Now, you also caused the accident. But the big ending that we're looking at is that you saved the old lady, so you are deserving of reward. If we think about the retributive model, which ignores the consequences, we're just going to look at your negligence in skateboarding into a little old lady who was out for her afternoon walk. And so you're not going to deserve reward under the retributive theory. In fact, you're probably going to deserve some kind of punishment. So that's an example that shows kind of the difference in how to distribute reward and punishment based on whether we're looking at the action itself or the consequences of the action. All right, so that's it for part 1 of the Chapter 7 lecture. I will see you all in part 2.